All right, everyone, thank you. Please join me in welcoming Juan Benet, CEO and founder of Protocol Labs. Thank you, Juan, for joining us.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with, first of all, thank you for being here, or thank you for having me here as well. Great that we can get together in person. For the pandemic duration, it was kind of really bad to have to be giving a lot of talks remotely and so on. Excited to be here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for 15 minutes, and then I want to do the last 15 minutes highly interactive. So kind of really get a bunch of questions out to talk through whatever is most relevant to you, just to kind of like wake you up a little bit and get like the memes well diffused. I'm going to start with a video. Thank you. Cool. So this is not going to be, I think, like a lot of the other talks that you hear in crypto. I'm going to jump around a lot of things because I'm kind of in especially when coming to a university, it's really useful to try and give you the lessons that I wish I had. And so in a sense, I'm kind of trying to giving you the talks that I would have wanted me to get. And so I'm going to jump around, and we're going to cover kind of science, technology, R&D, capital, corporations, and so on. I think that crypto has an enormous role to play in the world. It's not just why I work on it, but it's just an extremely powerful set of technologies. And what I want to do is I want to get you working on and thinking about like these extremely high leverage types of interventions. This is pretty different than what the day-to-day that you hear about crypto and so on. And now I will connect these ideas to very concrete projects that you can work on and think about today. But I do want you to kind of think about like the much bigger picture. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about capital and how capital works and why, first of all, it's kind of crypto's big application currently. But I just want to give you some intuitions as to kind of why this is like a key piece. And I'm kind of motivated a little bit by first off thinking about today we have pretty inadequate government systems relative to where technology is going. You saw in that in the video that I just showed lots of different kinds of technologies are coming. I really think that we're in this super critical, crazy century where there's like this major phase transition that life and intelligence are going through. Like if you like don't 10 years ago I couldn't show this slide. Like 10 years ago this was like crazy. Oh man, AI is never gonna happen. Like AGI is not gonna come this century. And a few of us had to be like no, it very likely will come this century, and it's actually like relatively close. A few people that understood that went and made DeepMind. A few other people, once they realized, oh shit, the DeepMind people are doing this. Oh man, we got to go and make OpenAI. And now, like the world has updated, and probably AGI is somewhere here. Anytime, I would not be surprised if it's here already. I would not be surprised, in 0 years. I would not be surprised also if it takes 15 years. but I would be extremely surprised if it took 40. And a lot of predictions have been fairly spot on. Not only is AI coming down the pike extremely quickly, but neurotech is about to really explode. So there's some major overtime window opening. There's significant openings that are happening today, mainly due to 2 or 3 companies. And as soon as those kind of get installed in a bigger way and start opening the barrier, the brain to internet barrier, you're going to start to see lots of reshaping of how the world works. The next one after that, which is not pictured here, is whole brain emulation, and that's further out. But I also would be pretty surprised if it doesn't happen 40 years from now. I would expect that to be like somewhere between 15 to 20. I think we're going to see the beginnings of that sometime this decade, but that stuff is coming. So all of this sounds crazy, right? The mainstream opinions are like nowhere close to this, right? Like governments today are kind of, the last 4 years are examples of like getting roadblocked and gridlocked on like whether or not masks like help with COVID. It's like, it's insane. It's basically a totally mismanaged way of running a civilization. At the same time, that same level of mismanagement is happening in our economic systems. We have deeply, deeply inadequate economic systems to do the kinds of things that we're trying to get them to do, to try to organize a society, to organize science, to organize technology development, to organize the provisioning of public goods, and so on. We have this deep climate crisis that is a direct result of the inadequacies of both our economies and our governments. Now, why am I talking about all this? It's because we have a potential solution in grasp. Most of these systems, these economies and these governments, have been built up slowly through rule sets encoded in papers, in agreements, in these systems, these programmable systems through paper, right? So these are like extremely slow systems. What crypto does, the fundamental innovation here, is that we're taking these kinds of rule sets and making them software, which means that you can get to deploy them into the internet at scale for fractions of a penny for everybody in the world to use. That's a crazy powerful innovation. It's an enormous lever. With that, you can rewrite all kinds of systems, rewrite all kinds of structures, rewrite all kinds of rules. It's super underappreciated right now, just the level of power that you have as individuals or as small groups to reshape the world with cleverly designed incentive structures. I'll give you one concrete example. What I consider to be the most important graph in the entire crypto space, still to this day, is the Bitcoin hash rate. Is this crazy exponential. Every single year, people are like, oh man, it couldn't possibly continue growing exponentially, and it continues to do so unabated. The level of money and energy poured into the Bitcoin hash rate is staggering. It's at the energy use is at the scale of nation states. And all of that drops out of 2 basic mechanisms. One, you have a cryptocurrency, and 2, you have an incentive structure paying people proportionally to the amount of hash rate that they give. And that's the power of incentive structures. You can use those same kind of mechanisms to rewire all kinds of other things. So concretely, you can use those things to, say, do something really valuable. So instead of like wasting all this hash rate in this kind of wasteful process, try to do something super useful and super valuable. In our case, in the Falcon community, we use it to create a storage network. Now people are starting to use it to increase solar. So try and get as many solar farms on the planet to increase the amount of trees in the world. So try and get reforestation to happen through it. I think those are like legit, very serious efforts that I think will play a very significant role over the next 10 years because they have this super amazing property of being broadly distributed to the world and permissionless and enabling anybody to join those networks and provide to create that work. So you really are playing with extremely powerful stuff, extremely powerful technologies, and you have in your ability a way to coordinate society to achieve extremely good outcomes. A lot of people today tend to underappreciate and undervalue what like crypto can do, and that comes from a lot of the kind of like the current size of crypto and maybe the mainstream like allergy that the mainstream world has developed Like today, crypto is it's actually quite difficult to like get broad adoption. Like we heard in the last panel quite a bit about that. I think that comes from these moments where, because it's fundamentally a technology that enables any kind of like financial instrument or any kind of governance structure, you get these like super fast flashpoints where like something just kind of like takes off really quickly, and then it's not well designed, it's kind of broken, and then like it causes problems. And so that has made a lot of groups like very careful and reticent to adopt certain things. But that's kind of like a matter of time sort of thing. People tend to think of like crypto as, like the mainstream world tends to think of crypto as overvalued. And I just want to give you a sense of like how wrong that perspective is. This is a great visualization from the Visual Capitalist that shows a bunch of different asset classes labeled with the rough size. So this is kind of crypto in 2021 in the peak. That's roughly where we were, where we are back now. This is kind of a military spending yearly. So this is kind of like what the world spends in all of the weaponry per year. So that's roughly already the same size. Current gold, like that to me is like staggering. Gold is a really cool metal, don't get me wrong, but it's totally insane that gold is regarded as dramatically more valuable than programmable financial instruments or programmable governance structures. Like that is totally crazy. Then you have like things like the S&P 500. There's an enormous amount of value generated and driven by these technologies that underlie these companies. By the way, know that like all of them have to do with computing and AI now. And this is only going to get more crazy over the next 10 years. So tons of companies out there are going to get wiped out by that. But note that like all of this, if you take all of these kind of stock instruments and start transacting them in crypto, then crypto just eats that entire asset class. Then you get into like the global money supply, stock markets, debt. This is like insane level of debt globally. Bad when governments pretend like think that you can just arbitrarily increase this. That didn't work out so well for the Dutch or the UK. And here's real estate. Like this is kind of insane, right? Like you're telling me that like the entire real estate of the world is really worth that, and programmable instruments are worth that? Especially if programmable instruments can represent all real estate? That's wild. And by the way, this is this real estate amount is like a crazy bubble, right? Like if all of that went to enter the market at the same day, how much of that would keep value? Here's like another crazy one: derivatives. Like people, the mainstream perspective is that crypto is like full of scams, full of problems, and so on. Oh man, can you imagine how many garbage derivatives exist here? This is insane. It's just like ludicrous to hear people say that when all kinds of financial crises happen because of this. And this is just the things that blow up. There's tons of stuff that happens that you never hear about. And the crazy thing is like something goes crazy here, and it's so big that it whiplashed the entire rest of the world, right? So something goes wrong here, and like millions of people end up homeless. Like it's crazy. And we have the opportunity to write rules into these systems that are verified by computers, where you have mathematical hard proofs that the operations are going to be following what we want. That's the kind of like potential that we have. Cool. So I promised to talk a little bit and then open for questions. So I think now is a good time. I'll like maybe flag two major things. One is R&D can be organized through crypto. Think of R&D as like this long pipeline of early basic research all the way to you turn that into technologies, you put that technology into a product, and then you sell it into the world and you scale it. You have venture capital on one side, providing the incentive structure, the support, the financial support to be able to get something into broad markets. And in the early parts of research, you have government funding. There's this big funding gap in the middle that which is kind of why things are actually fairly slow, why we don't have nice things. Things get stuck in the paper pile and don't make it through to products because there's no good incentive structure here. There are no good instruments to be able to make this a rational step. And it's way too early for VC to play, and way too late for government funding to fund. Governments tend not to fund this sort of thing. And I talked to you about like the scale here. One of the things that I'm spending time on now is realizing that the amount of money, so we talked about like, so this is kind of like the amount of money that the US spends in non-defense R&D. It's on the order of 70, $80 billion a year. This is NIH, NASA, DOE, NSF, and more. And by the way, this is kind of like why we went to the moon and why we got there. As soon as they like realized how expensive this was going to be, they canceled those programs, and this is why we didn't make it to Mars. This is why we got fission reactors used for energy. And this is why we don't have fusion today. So, but look at that. It's like 10, 20 billion a year. And that's the world's biggest R&D budget. The second biggest is China. And the rest all put together is like a 3 or 4x on that. So we're not talking about much money, right? Like we're talking about like, on the order of hundreds of billions a year. Which, again, if you were to look at this landscape and think of crypto growing into this over the next 5, 10, 20 years, we were talking about being able to fund broad-scale R&D around the world using crypto networks. Not through traditional funding agencies, not through traditional VC, but through mechanisms that you design right now. So one of the really optimistic things that we could do is we can go and convince a lot of the crypto networks today to dedicate a fraction of their supplies to public goods. Right now, the whole community in crypto is very excited about this sort of stuff. And as soon as those grow in value and they get to these kind of like 10 trillion, 100 trillion scales, you can then start funding R&D at the scale of nation states. If you have some other like really critical costs, like hey, maybe, conservation efforts for the world or decarbonization, reducing the amount of carbon in the world, you can do the same kind of structure. And so that's the kind of like opportunity that we have in our hands. Cool. So let's open up for questions, and then we can go through whatever people want.
You spoke about the power of crypto economics, but when it comes to at least the Deepin projects that we've seen in the market, it doesn't really feel like we've gotten the economics part right.
Sort of. I think in Deepin Network so far, we have figured out good incentive structures to create the supply. All of the Deepin networks right now are struggling with demand. And that's kind of like what I've seen in a lot of them, and I work with probably most of them at this point. What we've seen is that most teams, you can figure out a really scalable demand, supply side, but it's actually difficult enough that it kind of dosses the team. The team focuses on solving that problem, and they end up not solving the demand problem. And so now that we've like built up the supply, now all of the teams are like reorienting towards demand. And they are. Like the demand numbers are growing, but they're not growing nearly as fast as the supply side. And as the panel was saying earlier, the actual demand numbers, when you compare them to like early internet stuff or Web 2, they're good numbers. They're just kind of lopsided because the supply is so easy to get with crypto. So I would, it's an open question as to, A, can you come up with like good incentive structures for the demand side? I think it's possible. It's just tricky. Be careful about it, weird incentives. Like you really have to sell a good product. And then second, just teams should just hardcore focus on the demand side first, and then knowing that the supply side is actually fairly straightforward to do. And I do think that most Deepin networks are going in that direction. I would expect this sort of thing to be sorted out in the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for sharing. I have a question with the Filecoin tokenomics. If you were to redesign your tokenomics today, what will you choose differently?
Oh, tons of things. And this is the kind of thing like where like always in hindsight you can spot a lot of things. I'm gonna add a huge caveat here of saying these are ideas that I would explore, not that I would certainly do this. I would probably invert. In Filecoin initially, we extended the half-life instead of Bitcoin's 4, instead of turning to 6. I probably would have shortened that. And so instead make it 2 years instead of 6 years. There's one concrete one. Another one is I would have probably decoupled the protocol into more pieces and more components to make it more modular. The level of coupling has made it fairly difficult. And there's a lot of couplings in the economics themselves, and that makes it hard to work with. And probably a third would be put in the public goods mechanism stuff in place from the get-go. So like one of the things that I think is important for the Filecoin network to do eventually is to orient a huge fraction of the supply towards public goods. And there'll probably be FIPS about that in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of my friends has this framing that I found very funny, which is that blockchains are just Deepin for nodes. And I think that a lot of the examples that you gave, which I think are very compelling, were related to capital formation and incentive formation in sort of a digital context, and then the actual change happens in the physical world. But all of the examples that we have of these are sort of very specific instances of this. What do you think general protocol for digital, online capital formation that affects the real world would look like?
Yeah, so I think, we've already seen a lot of that happening in crypto. Like crypto today, tons of people use crypto for payments, for capital formation of various kinds. I think we've seen a decrease in that because there's a lot of like vested interest in keeping the current structures in place. I think that's a passing phase, and this will get opened up. I think what the world needs is right now, like existing jurisdictions want to protect the current status quo, and they're like uncertain about the future. And instead, I think what we need is like jurisdictions that are bold, that are gonna create kind of the future structures. Think of it kind of like India leapfrogging the rest of the world by deploying cell technology really fast everywhere, right? So India did not go to broadband; they went straight to mobile everywhere, and now they're leaders in the world in mobile connectivity. And so I think we're going to need jurisdictions that do that at large scale. I think that one of the super promising opportunities here is Argentina. So as you know, Argentina has had like super serious problems with inflation, and has had a ton of problems with its economy. Milei just came in as a new president of Argentina and is reshaping a lot of the infrastructure and creating this massive opening for crypto. He's very crypto positive, and I think we can get Argentina to like create for itself a massive financial infrastructure based on crypto. And I think this is a massive opportunity that exists like this year and next year. Probably will be gone 4 years from now unless there's like some significant return. And so if I were kind of like trying to think about improving economies and improving financial structures, I would go to Argentina and go to do this there and build a good foundational infrastructure for Argentinians that Argentinians like can rely on, and that solves real problems for them. And I think like as was said in the last panel, when you grow up in I was born and grew up in Mexico, so I'm familiar with an economy that is not very sound, and an economy that has corruption, and an economy that doesn't have the level of protections that you have here. And so it is hard for people that have only existed in like the very nice top of and super premium economies to really understand how bad things can get. And so I highly encourage you to go and try to like look at the economic landscape of people in a lot of the countries in the world that do not have access to these like really nice economic primitives, and then just realize that you can build them in crypto and deploy them there at scale, and like those jurisdictions will leapfrog. And so my sort of prediction is that I think we will get all of this sort of stuff adopted by these countries earlier than we will see it succeed here in the US, because the US is sort of captured by a lot of existing interests that don't want this innovation because they're getting disintermediated, so they don't want that, right? So I would like, think of that. There's a process here around pop-up cities that is extremely interesting in the crypto community. Because the crypto community is so distributed around the world, we're starting to see these pop-up cities emerge that bring together hundreds of people at a time to go and kickstart some of these kinds of things. And so there's one in Argentina happening in August. Cool. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think we better wrap it up.
Okay, great.
I wanted to say Juan will be speaking at Funding the Commons.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
this weekend. So if you would like to hear more from Juan, that's another opportunity for you on Saturday and Sunday to see him there. But thank you so much, Juan, for
Great.
joining us.
Thank you.